Yeah, hey, Leo's not here to keep me on time. Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, March 6, 2018 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me remind commissioners, please make sure that your microphone is lighted green and speak into the mic for the record. And we'll call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Present.
Commissioner Crane.
Present.
Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow is absent. Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do have a quorum. No personal appearances scheduled this evening. One item on our consent agenda, acceptance of minutes from our February 6, 2018 meeting. And unless any of the commissioners have concerns about that, I would entertain a motion either to approve minutes of our February 6, 2018 meeting or approve the consent agenda, as you wish. Thank you.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes from our February 6, 2018 meeting.
Second. I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Fizer, second by Commissioner Bowie to accept minutes of our February 6, 2018 meeting. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 7. Any opposed? And one abstention, Commissioner Wiggins, who was not with us then. So that'll be 7 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstention. All right, thank you. Nothing this evening under old business. So that takes us to new business, case 17036. The 27th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. This case does require a public hearing. And I think before we get into that, staff is the applicant, right, Ms. Carteret, Mr. Gress? So shall we start off and have you present the case?
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned, we're here this evening proposing the 27th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, which, as you can see, deals specifically with accessory dwelling units throughout the city. As you mentioned tonight, because it is a public hearing, tonight's meeting was advertised in the February 15th edition of the Journal newspaper. And items of record for this evening include the Growth Management Plan, the Unified Development Code, the Notice of Publication, and the staff report itself. Staff has provided the requirements for our code text amendment within the city, and as well as the findings of fact that are taken into consideration for this application. Before I get too far into the details, I'll kind of just back up and kind of give you a brief description on how it is we got to this 27th Amendment. If you think back to one of our previous meetings back in 2017, we discussed the 26th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, which had 3 different sections that staff had proposed changes to. Excuse me. The first section dealt with the keeping of animals on residential lots throughout the city. The second section was solar energy systems and requirements throughout the city. And the third was accessory dwelling units. At that meeting, the Planning Commission forwarded that to City Council with a recommendation of approval. At the first reading at City Council, the Council approved revisions 1 and 2, but decided to move revision 3, the accessory dwelling units, to a work session for further discussion. They held a work session on February 5th, and staff presented a detailed presentation on their proposal for accessory dwelling units, and the council provided a good amount of suggestions and feedback on that proposal. At that time, they directed staff to rebundle the items that we had presented to them along with their feedback and produce the 27th Amendment to UDC, which is what you see this evening. So some of this might look a little bit familiar, but we've made some tiny changes here and some tweaks to some definitions to help it hopefully make a little bit more sense. So again, just kind of a little bit familiar, so just kind of follow along as we go through this. The first section, as I mentioned, this proposed amendment is divided into 3 sections. In order for the amendment to totally make sense throughout the UDC, there were 3 separate sections that we had to modify in order for them all to kind of work together. So the first section deals with section 485.010 of the UDC, which is the definition section. So you can see we've proposed to add 2 definitions to kind of break the definition of accessory dwelling units into an attached accessory dwelling unit or a detached accessory dwelling unit, whereas a attached accessory dwelling unit is one that is physically attached to or located within the existing structure on the lot, but is physically separated from and not connected to the interior of the existing home. So if you have a finished basement, but there's no connection from the main structure to that other section of the basement, or if you add an addition onto the back of your home and there's no interior connection, that is what we would consider under this definition as an attached accessory dwelling unit. Staff had several discussions on that definition and some confusion that staff and other members had. Whereas if you're just finishing your basement and adding, a kitchen or a separate bedroom, is that truly an accessory dwelling unit? And staff kind of came up with, if there's an interior connection from that, from the main structure of the home to that accessory dwelling unit, then it's really not wholly a accessory dwelling unit. So long as there's not any connection between those 2 units from the interior of the home, staff would consider that an accessory dwelling unit. The next definition would be a detached accessory dwelling unit, which is self-explanatory in nature, which is a type of accessory dwelling unit that is built separate from the existing structure or above an existing accessory structure, such as a detached garage, or a shed, or just a totally cottage-type house that's totally separate from the main structure on the lot. Staff has also included a couple sketches and illustrations that will help maybe illustrate those definitions a little better, and I'll kind of elaborate those on here just a little bit in this presentation. The second revision deals with section 405.020 of the Unified Development Code, which is the use table. And you can see that we've modified it to make an accessory dwelling unit, both detached and attached, a special use in both the A, RE, RR, R1A, R1, and R1.5 zoning districts. And if you look over to the right-hand side of the table under the use standard, you can see that those uses would apply to section 420.050E, which will take me into the next section, revision number 3, which is where the bulk of the changes have taken place. So currently, the way our Unified Development Code is set up now, we do allow these in both the A, RE, and RR zoning districts, and there are no additional, there are some guidelines present, but we've added some of those to this proposal and crossed some of those out. So what you'll see that is highlighted is text that we've proposed to add, and what is crossed out is text that we've proposed to remove from the Unified Development Code. So I'll just go through them one by one. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me and ask questions. If not, we'll just regroup at the end and kind of go through this one by one. So the first, there shall be only 1 accessory dwelling unit per lot. That was in the code previously, and we've decided to keep that in there. Number 2, an accessory dwelling unit may be located within an existing residential structure or a detached structure. Again, either in the basement of a home or on top of or within an existing accessory structure. Number 4, an accessory dwelling unit, attached or detached, shall be limited to 60% of the total square footage of the existing structure, but shall not exceed 1,000 square foot in size. And that was determined just, trying to think of what is the typical size of, a 1-bedroom home with a kitchen and a bathroom, just trying to figure out what that might look like on a residential lot of several different sizes. So staff conducted a lot of research on what other communities had done and just tried to come up with the, basic calculation of what would make sense on a residential lot. Yes?
I guess I'm not clear why we are limiting to a 1-bedroom structure. Why we have that targeted as?
Sure. We wouldn't, I guess I shouldn't have said limited to a 1-bedroom. It would be limited to 60% of the existing structure or 1,000 square feet, whichever of those is less. So if you can fit 2 bedrooms within the 1,000 square feet, you're more than welcome to do that. It could also be, as small as a studio apartment where it's all one big open room with a kitchen and a dining room. We're not limiting the number of rooms that they can have in there, just so long as it fits within that 60% size restriction or 1,000 square feet, like I said.
I think I understand the original intent of the code was to speak to residence for mother-in-law quarters or that type of thing, but I don't understand why that was the underpinning, why we are targeting that. As code, we are to set regulations to assure safety and wellness for residences. but why are we specifying that this is of a limited size?
So we had a lot of discussions on what would make an accessory dwelling truly accessory to the principal use of the property, which in this case would be a single-family home, based on the proposals that we have in front of you this evening. We've talked about things about size, access, where can it be located on the property, and things like that. And for it to be truly accessory to the home, you obviously don't want it to be larger than the existing home on the lot. At that point, your existing home would essentially become your accessory dwelling unit. So we just wanted to be clear that if you have your mother-in-law or your son or daughter or something of that nature living with you, they're typically not going to need as much space in their section of the home or their accessory dwelling as you would in your entire single-family home. With these, you don't typically see 2 or 3 bedroom sizes or typically more than 1 bathroom. It's really truly is the minimal amount of necessities that you really need to get by and live in that home by yourself. So a 1-bedroom with a bathroom and maybe a small kitchenette is typically the standard layout for an accessory dwelling or homes of this size.
And to be clear, an accessory dwelling in this case that we're talking about, even if it's attached to my home, is not actually connected. In other words, there's no way to walk from there into my house. It would be completely separate.
Correct.
Whereas if I wanted to add on to my home an extra bedroom or bathroom, but there's a hallway or a common wall that's open that you can just walk past through, then I'm not limited in size.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
that's absolutely correct. So if a resident wanted to add on to their home or finish their basement or expand, add a couple bedrooms onto them, they're more than welcome to do that. It's only when they eliminate that connection between the existing structure and their addition to the home or their accessory dwelling unit that these requirements would kick in. So if you're wanting to section off your basement completely from the rest of your home and rent that out, that is when these size requirements would come into play.
Well, don't you think that's just a personal opinion of yours? If you're going to bring your mother-in-law and your father-in-law in, and they're elderly, they're going to need wider hallways, they're going to need a bigger kitchen, there's quite a bit. Limiting it to 1,000 square feet, in my opinion, and out in Ward 4 where I'm at, we have very large lots. Some of these lots are 750, 900 feet long. And problems with limiting the square footage, as well as I have another problem with a paved connection of at least 4 feet that goes back there. We've got driveways that are gravel out there. And if you want to set that, now, when I was looking at building one for my in-laws, it was going to be 300 foot behind my home. They needed a driveway all the way back there. And with what you're doing here, you're making it almost financially impossible for you to build something that would work, for your parents.
Very good points. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And if I live on a lot that is large enough to build a second structure that meets code that is larger than what was the primary, why is that posing a risk to anybody?
That's another good question, and I'll kind of elaborate on it a little bit more in another section or another part of this presentation. One of the things that we did look at is how this specific code would apply to lots of different sizes. So your typical 8,400 square foot single family lot versus, a 10,000 square foot lot or 100,000 square foot lot, that's a lot bigger. Right. And one of the things that you'll see in a couple of the diagrams is that with your typical 8,400 square foot lot, with an existing 1,700 square foot home on there, there's really not a whole lot of room left over for you to build a home until you start running into other things or other provisions within our code, such as lot coverage requirements, impervious surface, landscaping requirements, that would further restrict you from building something even larger or even smaller than what we've proposed here. So really, some of these requirements that we've added are really geared more towards those smaller single-family lots where your neighbor might be right in your backyard versus a larger property where you've got, a quarter mile or so, a much greater distance between your nearest neighbor. And that accessory dwelling unit might not have as great of an impact on your neighbor as it would, like I said, on a smaller residential lot.
And real quick, can you put it in the kind of perspective, the average, call it 2-door garage, if it was detached, how many square feet would that floor be in a detached garage?
Just a typical.
24.
Huh?
24, about 24.
Okay, but I mean, put that in.
It's a bigger one.
What I'm saying is give us a, you know, because I can picture a two-door garage.
Sure.
The space that's there, if I was going to throw a room on top of that, how many square feet would that room be?
500 to 600 square feet, depending.
So,
My detached garage is 30 by 40.
That's-
okay, but
1,200 square foot.
I'm talking about, and that's what I'm just,
That's
you know, because
more
a
than a
typical
two-car,
house
but
has
yeah.
2 car.
2 to 3 car garage.
Right, and so where I'm going with that is just to kind of help us understand the size that we're talking about. If a typical 2-door garage is 500 square feet, you're talking double that can be put onto the house. Right, and so I'm just wanting to grasp that, because when you think about 1,000 square feet, some people think that's not, I mean, I have a 5-bedroom home and it's 2,300 square feet, so you're talking about effectively half of my house. That's a lot of space. So trying to put it in perspective for us, because 1,000 square feet, while it may seem limited, I mean, in my opinion, some of the first places I lived in, I lived in a 3-bedroom home that was 1,100 square feet. So 1,000 square feet is quite a bit of space that we're allowing people to use,
But there's
in
a
my
little bit of
opinion.
perspective there, because as he said, when you live on a,
Right.
5 acres, or whatever, it's not,
No, and I completely agree that on a larger lot,
Yeah.
we might want to reconsider the size amount, but when I'm thinking of Creekmore, there's no way on earth you can throw
yeah.
1,000, you know, you can throw 1,500 square feet onto the back of one of those houses and not be
I grew up
attached to your neighbor.
Right.
I grew up in a 980 square foot home. My brother and I could not open our dresser drawer to get our socks out in the morning to go to school in one of the bedrooms. And, you know, if you have your mother-in-law and your father-in-law in there, and they require separate bedrooms, it's going to be a 2-bedroom home. And I just don't see how you can get the larger hallways and the larger spaces that's needed for people that are walking around with walkers and wheelchairs and that in 1,000 square foot.
I have a question.
Okay. Commissioner Meiske, please.
And I hate to put you on the spot here, but what's the definition of a accessory dwelling? I mean, because we're talking a mom-in-law place or something like that. Could it be a barn?
So the accessory dwelling would be, it's a separate living quarters that is separate and subordinate to.
It's got to be a living quarters?
Yes.
Okay.
So separate to and subordinate from the primary use of the property. So like I said, in this case, it would be a single-family residential lot.
Key word there being dwelling as opposed to an accessory structure or whatever.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was the intent in making it subordinate to the primary? Why do we specify that?
Because that falls under the category of an accessory use. It's accessory to the primary use of the property. So if the primary use is a single-family dwelling, the accessory use would be either a shed or the accessory dwelling itself. So by making it accessory, it eliminates the possibility of turning a single-family lot into a duplex lot. I mean, you still have those 2 separate units, but one is clearly subordinate to the other, whereas on an R2 two-family lot, you know, the 2 duplexes are typically a mirrored image of each other, and they're equal in size and things of that nature, whereas an accessory dwelling is smaller and subordinate to the single-family house itself. You're still able to get those 2 separate units on there, but it's not as evident and apparent that there's 2 separate dwelling units on that property.
Mr. Zerb, please.
Thank you. If I could provide additional insight on this, you would refer you to Chapter 485. In fact, the definitions that we have in the UDC make preference with regard to your accessory building as well as your accessory structure and accessory use. They are all 3 independently defined. The idea between the accessory use is a use that is subordinate in area, extent, and purpose to the principal use on a lot, and that is customarily found in conjunction with a permitted principal use. That's the accessory use. So it's going to be something that's permitted on that lot, just like a residential unit would have to be a permitted residential unit on that lot. The accessory building is a building that is subordinate in area, so smaller or subordinate to the primary, extent and purpose to the principal building, and use on a lot, and that is customarily used for a permitted accessory use. So again, it's talking in terms of a subordinate type position underneath the principal structure. And so we're just trying to make a distinction here. You could look at it for, I'm sure, mail purposes. So mail delivery purposes, where's the mailbox going to be? Well, it's generally going to be a mailbox that will identify the main address, and then you're going to have a mailbox that is a 401 Spring Street A or 401A Spring Street that's going to be associated with it. You're still going to be compliant with it, but we do have definitions already established for what your accessory use, your accessory building are in this situation.
Thank you. So my understanding is if I bought a lot with a small dwelling and decided to build a larger residence, that would be okay. It's simply that the primary residence would then become the newer structure?
I would make that argument.
And that would be different because we're talking about building, like to your point where you have acreage on your lot and you're building another house or a home. I mean, I would assume we would, zone that or that would fall under a different realm than an accessory dwelling. Correct?
Yes, and we've talked about this briefly. Like you said, if you own a 1,600 square foot home, but now all of a sudden you want to build a larger one, and now your existing home becomes your accessory dwelling unit. And I'm not sure we've necessarily reached a verdict on that quite yet. We've been trying to kind of figure out how that would interplay with these codes and kind of where the accessory dwelling unit would be allowed on a lot. Is an accessory dwelling unit allowed in the front yard of a property? It's all dependent on where that existing structure would be located versus where you would be proposing this accessory dwelling. Because the way it's set up now, just based on the code, an accessory dwelling would not be allowed in the front yard. So if your existing home that you purchased is, if it's a larger lot and that existing home is further back on your lot, there's not going to be a whole lot of room for you to add anything in close proximity to them, so you're going to have to revert to the front yard of that structure, if that makes sense. So in this case, under this code, would an accessory dwelling unit be allowed in that location? I'm not sure if maybe our code if our proposal was set up to address that, so I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I might defer to Mr. Carteret if he has a better explanation of that.
I think we're crossing lines here. I think what we're starting to get into is we are dealing with single-family zone property, allows one single-family residence upon that lot. In all the districts we're talking about, we're not talking about adding a second structure that is as big or larger than the primary structure. The intent of this is we have a single-family home, whatever size is on that lot dictates what else could be built on that lot. So the intent of this is truly to be accessory to that single-family home. An accessory usually would be smaller in intent, subordinate, what we've been talking about in our definitions. So that's why we have the 60% limitation and the 1,000 square foot. If somebody has a unique situation where they want a second home on the lot, there's provisions in here to make that request because you've got something unique. You need a larger second home for whatever reason it might be. There's ways to go about that, but this was not the mechanism by which we wanted to do that. This mechanism was intended to be truly something accessory to what is already there. If you have a 500 square foot home and that's what you live in right now, you can still have an accessory dwelling unit. Just has to be 60% of that 500 square foot single family home or that 500 square foot home itself. I think we just need to be careful that we're not, when we start talking about the square footage and the percentages and bigger homes necessary, the intent of this is truly to allow a smaller unit on the property for a very specific reason, whether that's for your kid that's coming home from college, whether that's for your parents, you have a child that needs care, but you want them on their own. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons to have these units. Maybe you just need a caretaker. Maybe you just want rental income to help you pay your mortgage. We're not limiting who lives in there or what you do with that structure. We're just saying, when you look at a single-family property, that's what we want you to see. We don't want you to see two homes on a single-family property. We want you to see one home with a smaller accessory building. And maybe it's somebody that lives in an accessory building. So I just want us to kind of stay focused on
So
that and not
if I
jump too
can-
far ahead.
If I can jump in.
So let me see if I got this right.
Frank?
Go ahead.
Let me see if I got this right. Currently, we have the ability that if I had a 2,600 square foot home and I wanted to build a 1,200 square foot home in the back of our property, say 350 foot back. And I had to take into account that we have no city sewers, and we'll have to set up a lateral system back there and all that. And we've got a gravel drive, and we want to extend that gravel drive back so that they can drive their car back there and park it in their garage and all. We have that capability within what we have now, and this will not interfere with that.
But you don't have the ability to build that second home on your lot right now, though.
You're
No,
limited to
no, but I think the
1,000
thing
square
is
feet.
that what we can do, I think what he's saying is that there's special, if you have a special situation where this occurs and you want to get this done, there's ways to go about it that allow you to do that apart from this standard right here.
And that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
There is a way to do what I just said.
There is a way through the variance procedure to do what you're doing. You're trying to vary from what the code allows you to do.
Well, I was just wanting to make sure the city wouldn't, if I came in with that, the city wouldn't hold this up and go, sorry, no can do.
I think that's a possibility.
Well, again, it's a single-family district, one home per lot. I don't care if you have 8,400 square foot or 80 acres, one home per lot. In your example, if you want to have a second home, you need to see if the subdivision code allows you to subdivide that and create two lots. If you
Okay, so I
can't,
would have to subdivide my lot.
and meet all the requirements for a second lot, meaning that every lot has to have frontage on a public street and
Oh,
the
so
size.
then I wouldn't be able to.
Right. You would have to go through a variance procedure to get a second home on your acreage.
Unless you gave them street.
If you wanted one that wouldn't comply with the accessory
Well,
dwelling.
that's kind of different than when I first originally brought up accessory dwellings and discussed them, what I thought we were going to come to an agreement on about being able to get your 90-year-old parents
Currently, we do not,
to live behind you.
we do not have the size restrictions currently. So if you do nothing tonight and don't approve any of this, we still allow it in the A, R, E, and RR. We don't have that size limitation.
But if we do this, then we won't.
If we do this the way it's currently written, we're saying every district has these limitations. You would need to accept out an A and RE lot from those, which we could do. I mean, that's, you have that authority to make that change, to say you don't have the size restriction on a large acreage A or RE lots. But right now, we've made it applicable to all the lots in the single-family district. So we are changing what the intent was initially is being changed, proposed to be changed tonight.
Okay, then I guess that tells me what how I need to vote.
Yeah.
Okay, and I was trying to be good, Mr. Gress, and let you finish your presentation, but I think having opened up to all the discussion now, I want to add my 2 cents. So a few things I'd like to point out. Mr. Zur, please be on alert here and correct me if I misspeak. So one observation is that this is not new code. Our current Unified Development Code already has 420-050E accessory dwellings. So this is not, in my mind, intended to be a completely new section. It is intended to be a modification, and I actually see it as being more permissive than current code. It allows more accessory dwellings in more places than we did previously. So I'm not necessarily going to argue that I think that this proposed new code is the be-all to end-all. I mean, I have to acknowledge this is the 27th change to the Unified Development Code, which obviously we continue to improve and update. And so I don't necessarily see this as the last word. I see it as a step forward to allow an additional option. That said, this is addressing an accessory dwelling in areas which are currently zoned single-family residential, and my opinion would be that zoning has at least several purposes, one of which is to preserve compatibility within that district that has consistent zoning. People living on an R1 lot have an expectation of what can be built on the R1 lots adjacent to them. And having said that, if that is in fact a true statement, we are trying to preserve compatibility and not have a multifamily or a large multifamily structure dropped in the middle of an R1 zoning. At the same time, we're trying to allow more permissive use for accessory dwellings for, as we've said earlier, aging parents, adult children, whatever happens to be that special situation. Okay, going a little bit further, you know, one option would be if you're in a reasonably large house or your children have moved out and you have bedrooms to spare, there's nothing here that addresses or would stop you from moving aging parents into that house. They're going to share bathrooms, share kitchens, share hallways, and we're not regulating or changing any regulations on that, correct? And so this falls in between moving parents or adult children into an existing house, and it's still a single-family residence, that family unit being, you know, a little broader perhaps. But this accessory dwelling falls in between that and actual multifamily, where you know, I know people who have bought a duplex or bought two adjacent townhomes, moved the parents into one, they're in the other. That's in conformance with R2 or whatever multifamily zoning. This, to me, fits in between that. And I think, Mr. Carteret, that's exactly what I heard you saying as well. So I feel fairly comfortable. Mr. Zur?
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis for it. The accessory uses, I know it's allowed in the agricultural and the rural residential, but what we're really trying to do there is to control it when someone is attempting to come in under your R1.5, where you've got a relatively smaller lot sizes, and you're still going to have, you're right, the close neighbors that are going to have to be addressing that. Homeowners associations may well step in on this as well, too, to
that's
limit that as
another
well,
animal.
but that's a totally
Yep.
extraneous thing. What we're trying to do is to make sure that in an R1 and an R1.5, you're not going to overpower the neighboring property owners with a large, monstrous accessory structure when you already have one that is similar in size, shape, design as what your neighboring properties are going to be.
And as Mr. Carteret said, and I hope I'm quoting you correctly, Mr. Carteret, but if you want to do something more intensive than that, you may be looking at a lot split, a replat, potentially some other mechanism to allow construction of a second house or a bigger house on what was currently a single large lot.
Question here.
Yeah, sorry. Commissioner Armstrong.
Help me understand. The purpose of the process is to, by my understanding, we're mandated to protect safety, health, welfare, and general use. If the size of a structure is going to negatively affect the common use of land, then wouldn't it be mandated for any type of structure, not just for an accessory dwelling? If it's specific for the use as a dwelling, then shouldn't it be impacting the health or welfare of the residents?
Your definition of health and welfare should not be too limiting on that particular regard. You're wanting to make sure to provide harmony and conformance with surrounding properties as well, too, so don't ignore that as a notion here. That all falls into your welfare and health of the community as well.
But then again, should not that be a general code? If our structures are allowed under other code restrictions, if they're not violating proximity to adjacent structures or adjacent boundaries, then how does the fact that it's a residence, an accessory dwelling, mean that it has to be smaller? Is my question clear?
I don't know that I apologize. If you could try again on that one.
Sure, I'm sorry. I'm not sure it was clear to me. So if the argument is that this structure has to be smaller than the primary, because if it is a larger structure, it's going to negatively impact the aesthetic of the subdivision, then wouldn't that need to be a code overall for any structure, a garage, a shed, any structure that you put into that subdivision is going to have to be smaller than the primary?
I think I would differ on that one, because if you're talking in terms of a garage or a shed, in this particular case, we're talking about making it for a residential use, a residential living situation. You could have a shed in the back that would be accessory in nature. It's going to be a shed. The size of it may be pretty large, although I don't think it would ever...
Well,
I'm trying to think of an example where it would come up with that.
if you're going to build a building that you're going to park an RV in or something like that, that could, be over the size limit of the house.
Right, I think it,
But
I think it
that's not
could,
gonna be
I think
utilized as a
it could
residential
also
property.
be disallowed, simply because, we're specifically talking about accessory dwellings here, but there's another section, I think it's 420-050A, talking about, what's the word I'm fishing for, accessory structures?
Accessory structures, and to speak to your point, ma'am, there are other things within our code that do regulate the sizes of different types of structures throughout the city. So for a single-family R1 residential district, we have what's called a maximum building coverage for that lot, which for that zoning district is typically 30%. So if you have an 8,400 square foot lot, your maximum size for a home on the lot is 30%. So if you build a home that's 30% of that lot, you can no longer add on to your property with an accessory dwelling unit or anything else that would cover anything else on that lot. And specifically to accessory structures in that category overall, those buildings are limited to 8% of the overall size of the lot. So there are other mechanisms. We're not trying to limit specifically just accessory dwelling units. There are other provisions in the code that would limit what other types of buildings and the sizes that they would occupy within a residential zoning district.
One thing that I'm considering, and I'm not really trying to come up with a malicious worst case, but I think it would be perfectly legally permissible for me to buy a lot with a small house, tear down the small house, build a large house. Raymore doesn't see a lot of this because of the age of the city, the age of the homes in the city, but this certainly happens a lot in other places. I'm trying to think, Julia Irene Kaufman, I think, stirred up something by buying a lot and building her mansion in the middle of an existing neighborhood. I know that happens in other parts of Kansas City Metro. So I don't think there'd be anything in city code that would stop you at all from buying a lot and either tearing down and building new or building onto the existing home to the point where you considerably increase the square footage of it. This code still limits accessory structures as being a secondary purpose or an auxiliary purpose or whatever adjective we want to use, but it's not the primary intent of an R1 zoned property.
And again, we're
Mr.
talking
Webb.
in terms of the dwelling of it as well, too, not necessarily just we've got a house or we've got a barn back behind us that has hay bales and whatnot in it. We're talking about utilizing this space for dwelling purposes tonight.
Right, and the barn, which conceivably could be bigger than the house, sounds to me like an agricultural use or an RE, maybe an RR. It really doesn't sound like something that would nicely go into a smaller lot subdivision. And we have other controls like the 30% total coverage, total lot coverage, things like that, which regulate that, so.
But doesn't this include the A, RE, and RR?
Mr. Gress?
Yes, the current proposal would replace what's existing in the code right now, and these provisions would apply to. But that, however,
I think
is our
that's the-
proposal. You are more than welcome to make those suggestions to us and to go back and tweak these a little. This is just simply what we've provided and put together
I
to
think
present to you
that's
this evening.
our biggest concern here is rolling in the A, RE, and RR with single-family in subdivisions in the middle of town. So I think that's because, yes, we build a dwelling, yeah, we have to put 50 foot of asphalt down. That's a whole lot different than Commissioner Crane's. Okay, I'm building one over here. I'm already 400 feet from the road. I'm building it 300 feet behind me, so that's 700 feet of, asphalt I got to pour and, and all that. So I think,
And we're taking away from people. The agriculture and the rural estate and the RR, in order to accommodate these people over here, we're restricting these people over here now. And there has to be some way that we can keep what A, RE, and RR have and come up with something
because we
for
did that with the
R1.
animals.
Mr. Cataret?
Going back to the point I made earlier, we're starting to cross lines, and if we're starting to talk about not limiting, I realize what the code currently says, that we didn't place that limit in accessory dwelling units. But I'm becoming more concerned as we're talking here, because now we're suddenly changing the true intent of our ag, our districts. They still only allow one home on that acreage. And so if we start not limiting size of what is an accessory dwelling unit, we really need to back up and take a look, okay, are we talking about allowing multiple homes on acreage property?
Well, that's what I'm
And
saying.
not having to
Jim.
subdivide it,
If you
just-
want to take
You could put
RE
3
and
homes because you
RR
have 10 acres.
and put something into the code that says, okay, we're going to limit it to 1,200 square foot because it's a larger lot as an accessory living structure, taking into account, health and safety of elderly people. And we want to do some of those other things. I can see that.
And I like that. I think, again, just to call it accessory, it still needs to be smaller than the principal structure.
And
So
I
as
agree.
long as we have that in there, maybe we don't limit the square footage in A and RE. RR is only an acre lot, so we maybe still want to think about limiting it there. But A and RE is 3 acres and larger.
Right.
Maybe we just place the limitation, can't be larger than the principal structure or the existing
Well,
structure.
yeah, I mean, I'm all for that.
So I want to check something out, Mr. Cataret, so I'm hearing between the lines, and I think what I just heard you say was the intent here is not to allow a subdivision on a single lot. Right. Makes perfectly good sense to me.
We limit it to one accessory dwelling, that's already in here.
Right.
And then in the A and RE, we just limit the size to, it cannot be any larger than the existing home.
And I see this proposed code as being, I understand Commissioner Crane's concern, and we may very well want to modify this proposed change, but I think the way I see this is it's a concession. It's allowing additional use. I don't know that the intent was ever to take away what we were allowed to do currently. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So obviously, we're going to discuss this further. Can we go ahead and let Mr. Gress continue with the presentation? Because I really want to hear the rest of it. And then we'll go after you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we've talked a little bit about the size requirements that we've come up with. So we'll touch back on those and kind of discuss those here at the end. The section number 5 here also deals a little bit with size, and it states that the accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed the height of the existing structure on the lot. So whether we go back to expanding the definition of what the maximum size can be, still the accessory dwelling unit cannot exceed the height of the existing structure on the lot. Number 6, an accessory dwelling unit shall comply with all requirements of the International 1 and 2 Family Dwelling Code adopted by the City of Raymore. And this is just really getting to the point of, right, currently you can construct a shed in the back of your home currently today. The only difference between those two right now is that now we're proposing that somebody could live in one of those sheds, and because of that, we believe that that structure should be constructed to the same standards that your existing structure is on the lot. So things like the construction of the walls, insulation, ventilation, and things like that. That accessory dwelling unit will still be held to those same standards that a typical single-family home would be held to during the construction phase. Number 8, either the existing or accessory dwelling unit shall be occupied by the property owner at either time the accessory dwelling unit is occupied. And 8A kind of draws a little line a little further and states that before a certificate of occupancy can be issued for the accessory dwelling unit, the property owner must sign an agreement stating that they will maintain occupancy of either the existing structure or the accessory dwelling unit. And that document shall be recorded with the Cass County Recorder of Deeds and would remain effective with that property so long as the accessory dwelling unit exists. So it would transfer with each property owner as that property is sold and bought further on down the line. Number 11 and 12 really deal with emergency access. That we had a couple good conversations with our fire district and our police staff here at the city, just in trying to identify how emergency services would be able to identify where that accessory dwelling unit is located on the lot, how they would get access to that if there was an emergency in the back of the home, or a detached structure that's further back on the lot maybe, if it's not obviously clear where that's located on a lot when they pull up for an emergency. So 11 states that a paved connection of at least 4 feet in width shall be made from an existing sidewalk or driveway located in the front yard of the existing structure to the entrance of the accessory structure. So that would tell emergency personnel exactly where they need to go to get to that emergency if there was one to occur in the accessory dwelling unit. In the case of an attached accessory dwelling unit, if the property owner wasn't home in the existing structure, emergency service would still know where to go and how to get to that rear entrance to that accessory dwelling unit. And then number 12, accessory dwelling units when located in a fenced-in rear or side yard shall maintain a gated access of at least 4 feet to accommodate the paved connection, just ensuring that if there is a gate that emergency services have the ability to get into that backyard to make contact with whatever the emergency might be in that situation. Number 13, the accessory dwelling unit shall be architecturally consistent with the design of the existing structure on the lot. Roof pitches, windows, doors, and other exterior finishes shall be designed to be compatible with the existing structure on the lot, which would ultimately be determined by the Director of Community Development. Our building official would be able to make some determinations on that. There would certainly be some design cues that we could look at and see, what that accessory dwelling unit would look like in relation to the existing structure on the lot. And then number 14, last but not least, the entrance to attached accessory dwelling unit shall be subordinate to that of the existing structure and shall be less visible from the street than the main entrance of the existing dwelling unit. Entrances to an attached accessory dwelling unit shall be located only in the side or rear yard of the property. And that really gets back to the continuity and the compatibility between the two uses. Obviously, a duplex is not the intended purpose for an R1 single-family lot. So if you have 2 front doors in your front door, that you just wouldn't expect that in your typical single-family residential subdivision. So moving that to the side yard or the rear yard just sort of, detracts from that attention that's being called to 2 front entrances on a single-family home. So that would conclude this portion of our revisions. Obviously, I'm assuming you have several more questions, so I'd be happy to try and answer those if I could.
Thank you, Mr. Gress. And before we go there, since this case requires a public hearing, let me open the public hearing on case 17036, 27th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, considering accessory dwelling units. If anyone from the public wishes to speak, please come forward to the podium, and seeing no one, it's my one chance tonight to whack the gavel and close the public hearing. Now the floor is open for additional discussion by the commission. I think we've had a very productive discussion thus far, and so I think possibly one of our next tasks is to see if we can sort out adding a distinction between the large lots, certainly the agricultural zoning and the rural estate, and the smaller lots, meaning pretty much everything else, R1, R1A, R1.5, and I would personally tend to put the RR at 1 acre minimum in with the smaller lots for that discussion, but again, I'm open to whatever everybody else thinks. Commissioners?
I was just curious about
Boyd?
something, if I will. I put a mark, when I was reading over this, I put a mark by 8A on page 4/5. The signed agreement that states they will remain occupancy of either the existing structure or the accessory dwelling. Does that agreement, and just educate me a little bit on this, is that agreement, does it automatically become a part of the deed that gets transferred? Because you mentioned that, and it kind of stuck out in my head. Do you want to kind of explain that a little more?
That's
Absolutely.
a question for Mr. Zur, isn't it?
It was our intent that that contractual agreement would remain in effect with the property so long as that accessory dwelling unit is constructed on the property. Certainly, if somebody buys it and they have no intention or no purpose for that unit, they can get rid of it if they would like, or like I said, if it's an interior or an attached accessory dwelling unit, they can simply open up a wall in their basement and make it to where it's no longer an accessory dwelling unit. But our intent was to carry that contractual agreement with the property owner, or with the property, as it's sold and bought, throughout its life, so that you ensure that you're not running into the situation where, well, now you've got two separate individuals that don't own the property, and that really gets to the situation of a multifamily lot or a duplex type situation.
So does that level of detail, as you explained it, need to be in here, or is it understood? And maybe that's more of a legal question. Is it understood what you just explained because it's not written in here and highlighted?
I think it's important for the ability to have the documentation actually recorded so that there's some reference there that there is an accessory use on this particular property and that there is an agreement, because you are going to try and limit the property owner from being able to create an accessory use and then, hey, he's going to spend half his time outside of the country and rent out both the top and the bottom at that particular time. So you're trying to avoid having the property owner create multifamily out of a single family unit there. There may be enforceability issues, at least how we are going to be able to track them down over time. Without having some type of an agreement on the public record, though, we won't be able to affirm anyone has got that in place when they start up the accessory dwelling structure.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Armstrong?
Do we have similar restrictions on renting a single-family residence? If I'm an owner and I rent out a single family, do I have to?
No, there's no city code requirement.
We're still talking about utilizing it as an accessory dwelling unit as well. It's not a separate dwelling, it's not a, parsing this out, it's not going to be, the idea is to have it be subservient to the original residential use on the property for it. No, we would not have a limitation with regard to recording some agreement for a residential use, a single lot, single house on a lot for that. You can rent that out without any issues on recordation.
Okay, so I don't understand the logic then of requiring a second unit to be.
Well, again, what we're dealing with single-family property. So in a single-family, one dwelling unit on a property, doesn't matter if an owner lives there or if it's rented. We don't care. It's still a single-family residence. When we start allowing an accessory dwelling unit, we don't want that to suddenly be a multifamily lot where I'm able to rent out both units. I got a duplex then. It's no longer an accessory unit, it's a duplex now. We have multiple families living there. The owner doesn't live there. It's important to require the owner to live there, because then you have the the attachment, it is truly accessory for that property owner for whatever reason they have, whether it's for caretaker, whether it's for income, whether it's a family member, there's a reason that they have that unit to support their ability to stay there. That's the intent of the ordinance. We don't want to simply allow a multifamily use on a single-family lot.
You'd basically be granting the benefits of an R2 zoning designation on an R1 designation if you had that, because you'd be allowing two separate rental items on the singular property without forcing the owner to go through a rezoning to make it an R2 zoning designation.
So I'm not entirely sure that Commissioner Armstrong is thinking exactly of the situation that I'm going to jump into, but I don't know, Mr. Cataret, what percentage of single-family homes in Raymore are occupied by a renter rather than an owner, but I'm sure we have some. Houses are rented to other people all the time. So here's the question, Mr. Zur. Let's say that I have rented a house, and it's on a fairly large lot or a reasonable sized lot, and I have aging parents and I want to move a parent in with me, but I want, maybe the house is not big enough. I convince the owner of the house to add on to it an accessory structure where I can move an aging parent, but I'm not the owner. I can't sign the legal document in clause number 8. I guess my thinking, just kind of naive here, my thinking is that if I'm leasing the house or renting the house, how is that different, or how should that be different than if I actually own the house? To you.
I think I'd go back to the notion of this is supposed to be identifiable for not creating a loophole for the R2 zoning designation.
Agreed. And I do agree
And
with that.
that fixes the potential for creating the R2 zoning designation by having the owner being an occupant of it as well, too. I think if you were going to approach your owner about that, you would simply approach your owner, not necessarily about building it as an accessory use, but you're just going to be having a parent living in the house with you at that particular point.
Or I could approach the owner about buying the house and then adding the granny flat or whatever. Yeah, it's not entirely shutting it down, but there is a line there.
But you're still protecting against the violation of the zoning designation from the R2 versus R1.
Yeah, and I do like zoning. Commissioner Meiske.
I have a question, I think, for Mr. Zur. When the owner sells a property, how does the new owner know that they have to sign a document? I mean, does that come out in the title search or something?
That's the idea of making it a recorded document, but that is where I've got my notes, is this could pose an enforcement issue on down the road, because we will not receive notification of that alteration.
The alteration being the change of deed? Yeah, we would receive notice of that, no.
So it could change hands 3 or 4 times, and this document get lost and not signed.
It only has to be signed by the original owner? Is that what
That's,
Right.
I think your concept-
So Commissioner Meiske, so what if I sell the house and I leave my in-laws in the care of the next owner?
yeah.
Sorry. Well, I feel like the question definitely is a valid question, particularly from the standpoint of on down the road, how does the city know that the property has changed ownership? However, given what I believe was the intent of accessory dwelling in the first place, I think, doesn't this all basically go back to a discussion about granny flats in the colloquial?
Well, if Mr. Zur had a property and he got an accessory dwelling approved and built it, and he had his in-laws in there, and then he sold that piece of property to me,
Right.
okay? And I rented it out to 2 different families. I mean, is there anything coming back to me saying, no, you can't do that because, you know, this is the way it is?
Yes. I mean, again, the initial owner that established the unit records the document. It
Right.
becomes part of the title, the chain of title.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
when he sells it to you, it's still part of the title search. Your title company needed to pick that up because it's a recorded document tied to that
Okay.
address. And if we do a
Somebody's going to
check,
tell me.
Somebody will have
Somebody's
to,
going to
it should
tell
be
me.
disclosed to you as part of the title search.
Okay.
And if you go and rent it to two different families, you may get away with it for a while, but at some point, through utility records, you got to have utility services.
Uh-huh.
If we check on it and it's in two different names and neither one of them's yours, then you as property owner are the one that gets the enforcement action.
But that would
Okay.
be how we'd have to go back in order to try and confirm that
Okay.
enforcement. I'm not so sure we would receive a notification that it would pop anytime there's a changeover that occurs. Now, if you as the property owner were not going to be utilizing that accessory dwelling structure and you wanted to have it released, you could basically, in order to have it released, it would be agreement between the original property owner and the city, and you would come in and we would have a release of that designation. Hey, the property is no longer being utilized under an accessory dwelling. We're hereby providing a release. The city is no longer monitoring it or having any control over it as an accessory dwelling unit, and that would then release it from the public record that you'd have there. But that would be the approach. My comment with regard to the enforcement is we would not necessarily see every time that it changes hands.
Right.
But it's still going to cause a blip on the title report so that a title company would say, here's the requirement that's imposed based upon this agreement for it. It would almost be a restrictive deed use is what you're talking about creating out of that
And
thing.
Mr. Zur, isn't that essentially the same thing that would unearth a homes association or some other?
Yeah, your homes association declarations would all be uncovered during the
Right.
course of your title resource, or title review and title search. So really what you're talking about doing is creating a deed restriction with that agreement that would be released only upon the city's approval of the release when you came in and said, I'm no longer utilizing that accessory dwelling structure.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Mr. Cataret, I apologize. You mentioned a word that piqued my interest. I think I heard you say something about utilities, and that was a question I had not asked. So in the old code, section 9 talked about a separate water connection. I don't see anything in the proposed new ordinance draft that talks about having separate utilities or not. Can you or Mr. Rokas talk about that for a minute?
I could start the discussion. We've gone back and forth with that requirement. Initially, we wanted them to be totally separate. Where we've left it now is, the code is silent on it, meaning that you could either attempt to utilize your existing water and sanitary sewer service or septic system. But when you apply for the permit for the accessory dwelling unit is when we make the determination and do the analysis, can the existing water and sewer serve the additional unit? Or you always have the option to run independent water and sewer to the accessory dwelling unit.
But you could actually do that with an existing house, couldn't you?
You could, yes. You could have more than one service if you need.
Particularly a house with a detached garage, maybe you've got a shop in the garage, you run separate electrical or separate water.
So we were leaving that up to the
Yeah,
property owner.
okay.
You choose which one you want to do. But if it is going to utilizing existing, there's still an analysis to be done.
Yeah.
You can't be over capacity for the water or sewer to serve that other unit. So we would do that analysis.
Part of the building permit process,
Exactly.
you said. Okay, thank you, I like that answer. Other questions? Commissioner Armstrong?
Yeah, the number 11, the paved connection of at least 4 foot in width, I certainly understand the need to allow access for emergency services. I don't believe my house currently has a paved connection of 4 foot wide, so is that required for all residents?
It says it is. Well, the draft says it is.
In the R1 district, a paved driveway would be required. Certainly in a larger zoning district, you might be able to get away with a gravel driveway or something less common or less stable than a concrete driveway. In this case, like I said, with the R1 zoning district, that paved connection is required for that home. So for emergency purposes, we would want to see that connection from that existing paved connection back to the accessory dwelling unit, wherever it might be located on the property. In this case, like you said, if your existing home doesn't have any concrete pathway to connect to. That also might be something that we look at, accepting the A and RE zoning districts from those requirements. If you have a gravel driveway, there's no need to put in perhaps a concrete pathway from a gravel connection back to the back. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in this case, like I said, maybe looking at the size requirements in different lot sizes and zoning districts would be something that could exempt that from that requirement. But just like I said, in our discussions with the fire district and the police department, having a clear understanding of where that unit is located was extremely important to them in relation to addressing and its location on the lot. Just so when they get there, they're not having to scramble to figure out, all right, well, do I go to the front door? Is it in the back? Do I go around to the left? Do I go to the right? All those decisions severely impact their response time and their ability to address emergency situations, which is why it was included in this ordinance and is important to perhaps more specifically the R1 and smaller zoning districts.
So if it was simply a connection or written in the same way that it is for the primary residence, that there is access?
Yes, so long as
The
there's
needs
something
for
that
the
would guarantee
emergency
access
service.
from the front of the property or the existing structure back to that accessory dwelling unit.
Chairman,
Yeah.
perhaps an inclusion of a clearly marked and accessible connection language would be appropriate. And going back real quickly, not to go back on an issue you guys have already discussed, but instead of agreement under that 8A, it may be appropriate for staff to look at the inclusion of a deed restriction for the benefit of the city, so that it would read, before a certificate of occupancy can be issued, the property owner must sign a deed restriction for the benefit of the city, stating they will maintain the occupancy of either the existing structure or the accessory dwelling, and then such deed restriction shall be recorded with the Cass County Recorder of Deeds. That's more in line with what you're actually talking about doing.
Yeah, I think that's clearer than just an agreement. Who knows what an agreement is?
Thank you. Sorry. Commissioner Armstrong.
And last but not least, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're
Number
fine.
13, the accessory dwelling shall be architecturally consistent. Can you help me understand the rationale for that? It would seem restrictive.
Sure, absolutely. And again, this entire ordinance, I guess now that I think about it, really goes back to the fact that we're looking to allow these in our single-family zoning districts, which you wouldn't typically see a metal barn or a wooden shed that doesn't necessarily fit in with the existing structure. And all of that really goes back to kind of your point of it protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood, and Mr. Zur kind of touched on that as well. The fact that somebody would potentially be living in this and drawing a lot more attention to the structure than, just your average utility shed would. In this case, you're going to have people going in and out of it all times of the day. You're going to have lights going on inside, doors opening and closing and things like that. So we think it's important to recognize that and require that it be brought up to a little bit higher design standards so it is consistent with the surroundings of the existing neighborhood and the existing home on the lot. We're not saying you have to build it to the exact same standard of what's in your lot, just so long as there's some continuity, consistency between the two of them. Right now, we don't have any requirements that, a home has wood siding on their property. Really, the only requirements that they have is that it's weatherproof, weathertight, and sealed from the elements. So somebody could come in today and put metal siding on their home if they wanted to. We're not necessarily trying to tell the homeowner what they need to put on the outside of their home. We're just requiring that whatever in that accessory dwelling unit is consistent with whatever their existing unit is on the property. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a 100% replica of their existing home, just so long as you're not getting a flat roof or some sort of unit that looks like a chicken coop or something like that in your backyard. We want to see some consistency of the roof pitches, roof lines, window finishings, exterior finishes, and things like that.
Am I correct that we don't currently have that requirement for a detached garage?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, so I see your point.
And, yeah, do you find any concern about vagueness in the wording? To me, it would seem to be fairly subjective.
What did you say? I'm sorry, say it again,
I'm sorry, I was just concerned about the subjectiveness of the determination. It just says that compatible with the existing structure, which is open to interpretation.
I think in this case, the vagueness might, be a positive thing. Like I said, we're not restricting them to build an exact replica of their home. Certainly, there'll be some flexibility in the design of the accessory dwelling unit in relation to the existing unit. But ultimately, it would be up to staff or our building official, Mr. Cutter, or myself, to make that determination. Like I said, we're going to be able to tell if an effort was made to, make it tie into the existing home, or if they're just proposing a metal pole barn that they're going to, put a bedroom in and a bathroom. So there's definitely going to be some, judgments that are going to be made as to determine whether or not what they're proposing is consistent with what's already existing on the lot.
All right, Mr. Zur?
I would note on that 13, it is not just necessarily related to detached accessory structures. So we're talking about if someone were to come in and add an additional portion to the back of their house, we would be looking at making sure that that comported with what their current house looked like. So it's not going to look like we took 2 trailers and stuck them together of different colors, shapes, sizes, et cetera.
Go ahead, Commissioner Armstrong.
But if I'm expanding my house, not using it as an accessory dwelling, if there's internal connection, am I required to submit that plan for your consideration?
If it's not an accessory dwelling unit, then no.
So,
So why am I?
Got to get a permit, but
okay, Commissioner Armstrong, so I'm probably going to add more fuel to the fire here, but when I looked at this, to me, it seemed similar to I think it's called design standards, which we have currently on commercial properties, not on residential. And looking at it again, I see some subjective wording there. In the first line, I see consistent. In the third line, I see compatible. I'm not an English major. I don't claim to know how subtle the differences are between compatible and consistent. Compatible, to me, seems a little more flexible, I guess. And my first thought was, well, how about architecturally compatible? But again, we could argue that any of this is subjective. The intent, and I'm hopefully reiterating something Mr. Carteret said earlier, the intent here goes back to that one key word, accessory. This was intended to be permissive and allow an additional use on an R1 zone property.
But accessory, meaning subordinate, shouldn't raise the standard for the construction. If we are not requiring it for residential expansion, then I don't understand how we expand that definition of accessory to a dwelling.
I think that's a fair question. Staff?
again, as Mr. Gress pointed out, when you have the addition, when you have the detached building as a separate living unit, you're drawing attention to it. It's very different than just a storage shed or an addition to your home. It's going to have a separate entrance. It's going to have a totally separate feel to it. And so it's going to have a lot of attention drawn to it. We just feel that it needs to blend in with the existing structure. You don't want it to look like what's going on at the side of the house there. Totally different, totally separate, not connected in any way. It's not consistent with the rest of the architecture. It draws attention to itself. We're trying to avoid that. That's why we don't want the front door to the accessory dwelling unit that's attached on the front. We want it on the side of the back because we're trying not to draw attention to that. And that's the reason I think that we were looking at having some level of standard, because as soon as you move somebody into it, it's risen above just an accessory, a storage addition or a storage shed. It just has a different feel about it, and we think it needs to be more in line with what the current structure looks like.
I generally understand where you're going with that. Like my house, if I added an accessory dwelling unit that's attached to it, it would be pretty obvious if it didn't blend in with the same structure of my home. However, If it was detached, my neighborhood, not a single house looks the same anyway. So if you had a completely different looking a detached accessory dwelling, I don't know that it would impact my neighborhood. Now, I do know some neighborhoods have a pretty standard look to them, and I would assume HOAs could more specifically dictate that so that we don't have to limit it. Because in my backyard, if I put in a detached accessory dwelling, regardless of how I built it, it's not going to stick out because none of the houses on my street match. Now, if it was attached to my home, that's a whole nother ballgame. If, I, to your point, have a wooden siding, and then my accessory dwelling I throw on there, I put metal, and it's got a metal roof, and it looks like a shed that I just slapped on the side of my house. Okay, I get it. But is there a way to kind of say detached doesn't necessarily have to, and if it's attached to the home, yes, so that there's a little more leeway if I'm building something that's separate, like a shed or a garage that's not attached, and there's no real limit there at that point. We can go ahead and do that. And then allow the HOAs to kind of dictate, no, we want it to be consistent, period.
Well, I think to add to the confusion a little bit here, and again, I'm still thinking about design standards for commercial, but one of the things that we try to achieve with those design standards is to break up the monotony. And so we're actually looking for some stone work or some brickwork on a house with siding or stucco. We're looking for a mixture, and frankly, in my opinion, Mr. Carteret, Mr. Gress, I would not see that as architecturally inconsistent to break up the monotony with different materials or different setbacks or other devices that it's different, but it's still compatible. I guess that would be my intent. Want to throw that back at us?
Sure. The notion would be if you're looking at, right now it's to be determined by the Director of the Community Development, and the notion would be consistent and compatible. You could use different terms if you were looking for perhaps harmonious. Harmonious would not necessarily mean that it's consistent with the same. It just means that it's going to be harmonious to make it not look bad.
So
And
harmonious rather than consistent,
Yeah.
compatible. Harmonious is a little more flexible term.
That's correct. And then if that.
I certainly
Right now, it's to be
appreciate that.
determined by the Director of Community Development. There is the notion that if you wanted to, that could be an appealable to the Planning and Zoning.
Well, worst case, Planning and Zoning Commission does review design standards for commercial properties. That's one of our jobs.
Yep.
Frankly, I don't see that we want to get into the business of requiring review by Planning and Zoning Commission of any add-on or accessory structure
But it would
on a
only be as,
residence, because we're not a homes association.
and it would only be as an appeal option.
Yeah, appeals might make sense. Something in between actually having to go for a variance, for instance.
We probably have to talk through the details of how that would work, but that might be something we
Yeah. Personally, I think I could strike number 13 entirely until somebody managed to create something that we all regretted, and then I'd probably say, oh, darn, we had a chance, but we let it slip through.
Yeah, I think the ambiguity in 13 is, like you said earlier, it's not bad to be ambiguous, because then it kind of leaves things, you allow more flexibility. That's just kind of how I look at it.
Well, and I think that would be included in the engineering review for adequate utilities, et cetera, et cetera. It's just part of that same process, right?
As far as the architectural standard? Yeah, I mean, when they
Yeah.
submit their plans, they would have to submit the
Yeah.
architectural design.
Number 13 would be
Right.
included in that, but it's not the only thing being reviewed,
Correct.
because you're reviewing
Utilities,
setbacks and lot coverage and all of the legal requirements.
Right, correct.
Yeah. I'm actually comfortable with that, Commissioner Bowie. Thank you for that. Okay. Commissioner Meiske.
I got one more comment. I'm assuming that we are looking in the future of, expanding the boundaries of Raymore at some point in time where this is going to affect. And if you look at expansion of Raymore annexation, a lot of it's rural. And a lot of these, I think, my comment is we need to segregate the A and RE from the, in-town home association, that kind of thing. Because it's highly possible that we annex a piece of property that's 5 or 10 acres. It's got an old farmhouse on it, and then you want to create another structure of it's, that's the kind, so my comment is I think we need to segregate those,
Yeah.
so.
Well, so I don't know that we're really close to considering a motion on this, but let me just throw this out based on discussion this evening. What I see is at least some desire to exclude agricultural and rural estate, 3 acres or larger, from all of the, let me rephrase that, sorry. A desire to exclude RE and ag from some of these restrictions. I don't know how the whole commission feels about that, but, there's certain paragraphs here that we probably know about or could identify. And Commissioner Crane, I forget what really set this discussion off. Paragraph 4. So 4 is 1.
4, 5, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Meiske. Now tell me again slowly. 4, 5,
11, 12, 13.
Have anything on 5.
5 dealt with the size of the structure, but it was more relative to the height, just saying that it should not exceed the height of
yeah,
the...
but I hear where Commissioner Meiske's going. If we exclude RE and A from number 4, I don't think it's unreasonable to exclude them from 5 as well.
Right.
But, okay, so I'm sorry, I'm slow here. 11, 12,
13 and 14.
okay.
And not saying that we need to, I'm not saying that we get rid of them. I'm just saying that reword them to meet the A and R and RE specifically.
I do think we need to be very careful here because this, spanning from R1A 1.5 and without looking at the code, I'm just kind of going to group all those together. Smaller lots actually can be smaller than 8,400 square feet if it's in a planned district.
Right.
And, to me, I'm perfectly comfortable with being less restrictive on A and RE. We've got a precedent for that. And then I'm actually kind of on the fence as far as RR. To me, I tend to put RR with the smaller lot sizes, but, that's just, I throw that out for further discussion.
What is that subdivision over there by J Highway that's right across from Morning View?
Skyview? To the south?
Yeah, it's J and Lucy Webb, kind of that corner.
Yeah, to the southwest, I think that's still part of Skyview. isn't it?
Skyview Estates.
Is that what it is? And those lots are, I know there's some smaller lots because the one Jason and Stacy lived. They had a small lot, but you can get into larger lots, and I don't know how far or how big those lots are.
Well, and again, potentially, you can have a large lot that could qualify for RE, for instance, but it's R1 zoned. we got into that discussion with animals.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Commissioner,
there's a house in that neighborhood that has an accessory
A pool
dwelling
house, yeah.
behind it.
That looks like a
And,
house.
you know, it's a good chance for anybody, if they want to go and go up into that neighborhood, you can kind of see how it fits on that lot. And from what I can tell from Lucy Webb, that lot is probably, it's a little over an acre, I think. But, you know, it's one of the smaller acreages. And it gives you a pretty good idea of what'll fit on one of those lots.
Yeah. And they don't have a home association there.
well, I was going to say, Mr. Cataret, I don't know what percentage of all lots in Raymore are covered under a homes association, and of course, each one can have different, bylaws and restrictions. But, you know, I tend to think certainly the newer, larger subdivisions, all covered by homes associations, this isn't going to necessarily cause any impact there because they're not going to allow this in the first place.
Right.
So I think we have a mixture of probably older lots, you know, pre-subdivision days, pre-homes association days. Those may be smaller. We have acreage lots. We definitely have a lot of diversity. And I think one of the difficulties that's come out in the discussion tonight is trying to have one section of code cover what really are widely diverse, all single-family zonings.
Now, can any homeowner walk in with a variance and want to do something?
Well, you can request it,
I
but
mean-
you've got to get it approved before it's
Right.
legal.
Yeah,
But
you
they-
can request.
Okay. So if they have one of these unusual lots in that subdivision and they want to do something like that, then we can grant them a variance?
Not
Well,
us.
there's
Not-
specific findings that have to be made, there's hardships that have to be met.
Right, but that's not Planning and Zoning Commission.
No, it's Board of
Oh.
Adjustment.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay.
It's a different body.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yeah, Mr. Cataret.
we've
please.
had discussion at the staff level. There's been a lot of discussion tonight, a lot of good input. We would prefer not to try to do a motion this evening to try to put language together. This is actually not scheduled to get in front of City Council until May, their May 14th meeting.
Really?
So we
Okay.
have time, if, with your permission, allow staff, Mr. Zer, to get together to take into all the comments that everybody has had and come back with you. Give you a couple of weeks to digest what we've gone over.
Sure. So,
And it may be
Mr.
new items, but if we come back in 2 weeks at our next meeting, we could then just continue the hearing.
I was going to say, so Mr. Zer, remind me, is a continuation the right way to do that rather than tabling?
Say,
You've closed your public hearing at this particular point.
I did.
Yeah, you can continue the matter to a date certain or table the matter to a date certain if you're inclined to do so.
does that,
Which one is better? Continue, table?
I'd table it.
and that requires a motion to table?
Requires, who said that? Yeah, good, thank you.
So I'll move to,
honest.
you're welcome. I'll move to table this topic until the March 20th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
There you go.
I can second it. Did you want to make the motion in reference to case number or anything?
Oh, sure, sorry. I will, yeah, there's only one on here, but yeah.
17036.
Yeah, I will motion to table, what was it?
Case
170.
Case 17036 till
To
the
the-
March
to
20th
the March 20th
Planning
meeting.
and Zoning Commission meeting.
I'll
Okay,
second.
and second by Commissioner Bowie. Okay, so let me see if I can simply restate this. We have a motion by Commissioner Urquia, second by Commissioner Bowie, to table case 17036 to our March 20th meeting. Sound right?
For me?
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion?
No discussion, but as much as you can provide us in detail and is good. So if you know, for the next meeting, if I like the way you kind of put this together and gave some pictures and so forth, but if there's some clarification that might address some of these that you could add to the package, that would be helpful for us. So we can kind of review that before we get here and so forth.
Yeah, okay. to me, that was discussion, but that was perfectly fine. Any further discussion before we vote on the motion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to table to 3:20, raise a hand, please. Let's see, I'm starting to run out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you, staff. I think that was a very smart move. Mr. Grass?
If I could add one more thing. One thing I wasn't able to present to you all and talk about this evening was the 2 handouts that were located behind the staff report, which might have helped to introduce that first, because it might have illustrated some of the questions that you all had. One of the first things that we tried to put together for this case was to illustrate. It's one thing to read the code and visualize it, but it's one thing to actually see what it would look like on a lot. So you brought up the case of the accessory dwelling unit that exists, on the just outside of town here. So looking at that would really help to see what an accessory dwelling would truly look like on an acre-sized lot or a 2-acre lot. So one thing that this handout really does is helps you visualize what an 8,400 square foot lot with a 1,600 foot home looks like, and what an accessory dwelling unit would look like on lot in comparison to that. So I would encourage you, this will likely get changed based on the different changes that we make in the code based on our discussion tonight. But I would encourage you, up until the point you receive that next packet, would be to kind of look through this and just kind of visualize what these code requirements actually look like, other than just kind of what they read on paper. Just trying to visualize what that would look like on a lot itself. So perhaps maybe next time jumping into this discussion with this ahead of the staff report would be a little more helpful. Like you said, just trying to provide as much detail as possible.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Could
That-
we,
Yeah, sorry.
he mentioned that lot on Lucy, I don't know the lot he's talking about when you're driving down with Lucy Webb. Is it possible to get a picture of that for the meeting?
Just
Absolutely.
as a for instance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got GIS and aerial photography. That seems reasonable. Thank you, Commissioner Urquia. Okay, let's move on from new business. Mr. Zur, if you would, give us the city council reports, please.
Thank you very much. Happy to be able to do so. Since your last meeting, we've had 2 city council meetings, the first on February 12th, 2018, the second one on February 26th, 2018. Of interest for this commission, I would first point out the February 12th meeting. Our newest member tonight, Commissioner Wiggins, was appointed to this commission to serve. We look forward to working with him as he continues on in public service beyond his time on the Charter Review Commission. I would note, just as a side note for your interest, the Show Me Green sales tax holiday was approved by the City Council to allow for a tax abatement period between April 19th and April 25th for the annual sales tax holiday. So mark that on your calendars. We also had the opportunity to do first readings for extensions of 2 plats. This does not come before the Planning and Zoning Commission, but the Alexander Creek preliminary plat was extended for a 1-year period of time at the request of the developer Salih Homes, and the Raymore Galleria North preliminary plat was also extended for a 1-year period of time at the request of the original developer North 58 Equity Partners. The only thing of real issue and concern that you all would have seen was the Edgewater at Creekmore 6th final plat, which was originally reviewed by this Planning and Zoning Commission on the 6th of February and approved by a vote of 6-0. At the first reading, it was read and approved by a unanimous vote of the council for all those present at the first reading. That is all from the February 12th meeting. From the February 26th meeting, I would simply note the only thing on there that was done was of interest for the Planning and Zoning Commission was the second reading and final approval of the Edgewater at Creekmore 6th and final plat. So there has been an additional 54 lots added to the Creekmore subdivision based upon the second vote of the City Council on February 26th. That would conclude my City Council report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Zur. Mr. Catterat, Mr. Grass, if you'd like to start with staff report.
Yes, thank you. I'll start. Have a couple items. First, let's look at the schedule for the commission. Of course, we will have the meeting on March 20th. We'll have the continued discussion on the 27th Amendment. That'll be first on the agenda, followed up by some commissioner training, more, just some information for mainly our newer commissioners, some things that we try to do on an annual basis. Mr. Zer will help us on that part of it. That'll be the second item on the agenda. No meeting on April 3rd. That's an election day. This room is still being utilized as a precinct location. We hope to get it moved over to Centerview, but for the April election, we have to cancel our meeting. But we will have a meeting on April 17. We have a public hearing that evening, which is our annual review of our growth management plan. So we'll be providing a report for your review and discussion at that meeting.
Okay.
The second item, I talk about, just a reminder that the National Planning Conference is coming up in April. And we don't have a commissioner yet signed up for that. The city annual budget does allow for a commissioner to attend the national conference, so it's, all the expenses are paid, airfare, hotel, a conference and all that, meal per diem. We like to have a commissioner go each year. We've had one go for every year that I can remember. I don't think we've ever missed one in the last 15 years. But the conference this year is from April, starts on a Saturday morning, April 21st, goes through Tuesday the 24th. So Mr. Gress and I will be attending. We both travel in the day before and get settled in. The conference starts right at 8 o'clock on Saturday. It's in New Orleans this year.
I think if memory serves me, we have a commissioner who's willing to go but has been before, and we would certainly offer the opportunity to a commissioner who has not participated in the national conference previously, but what's our deadline for registration?
It's, I think, the 20th of the month, so it's quickly approaching.
I was going to say, it's actually going to hit us before the, well,
I think it will.
or same date as our next meeting. So what do you suggest as far as, I guess I can say, show of hands, anybody here on the commission this evening, since all of us are here except the mayor? It's pretty good representation. Anybody here that wants to go to New Orleans at the end of April?
Possibly, but it would just depend on the dates. Again, I need to just confirm that it's not an issue.
Okay. Then you're willing to go if we
Yeah, I
don't?
can go if no one's going, but I've been before, so
Right,
I kind of want to
right.
give other people
Well,
the option.
so my strong preference, and other commissioners feel free to discuss, but I definitely think someone from the commission should go. It's certainly an opportunity that we don't want to let slip by. Commissioner Urquia, if you can either confirm or waive off, are there any other commissioners that,
Got a hand over here.
okay? Yeah, okay.
No, if you can go and you want to go,
Okay.
go, if you haven't been before. I didn't want to, since I hadn't gone before, I know I'm like one of the newer members, I
That's
would love to, but.
not a problem.
If you haven't been yet, go,
Um,
if you can. Like, if you can say yes right now, say yes right now, and then.
Okay.
you know,
Well,
end of discussion.
let's, I was going to say, Commissioner Urquia, you threw the hat in the ring first. If you can go, I'd say it's yours. If not, Commissioner Armstrong. If not, I'm going to go with Commissioner Pfizer.
And just some noted, their website does say March 22nd is the deadline for regular pricing. So
Thank you.
just for what it's worth.
So, sounds like, I hate to cut it to the wire, but it sounds like we can sort this out. If the smoke hasn't cleared before, we'll sort this out at our March 20th meeting.
Obviously, the earlier the better, if we can
Sure.
make
Getting
for hotel
reservations and-
reservations. Gets a little complicated
Yeah,
if we wait too long. There's a conference hotel, but there's a good selection in New Orleans right around where the conference center is, so we should be able to get the hotel okay.
That's like at 8 in the morning,
right.
Yes.
Thanks.
I also want to be there the night before, so fly out the 20th.
It ends about midday on the 24th on Tuesday. It's over about 1
Fly
o'clock
back on the 24th.
on that Tuesday.
The biggest challenge to think about is, in addition to hotel accommodations, would be flights. I just finished booking my flights this past weekend, and they are filling up extremely quickly to fly out the day before the conference. So if you're thinking about going, you might want to think about flying out a day ahead of time or maybe the day of the conference and miss a couple sessions. Because I know on certain airlines, at least the ones I was looking at, they were few and far between for tickets for that day.
Okay. Okay. Still look good? Or still need to
I'm
confirm?
probably 50/50 at this point.
Okay.
If somebody's 100%, then like
Okay.
I said, lock it in.
Well, so I think it was actually in our packets this evening. You all should have a listing of all the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Please feel free to talk among yourselves. Commissioner Kia, if you figure out if you're a go or a no-go, call Commissioner Armstrong, right? And then if you're a go, get back with staff, whoever get back with staff. Just, I don't need to be in the middle of this. But sounds like even though the deadline is the 22nd, sounds like the sooner we can lock this in, the better off it'll be for travel arrangements, right? And you're the emergency, you're the emergency spare backup. Yeah, and the vice chair to boot. Okay, thank you, sorry.
Oh, thank you very much. Again,
That was an
just-
interesting, hey, it was
Yeah.
less painful than accessory dwellings, right?
We get to relive it all in 2 weeks.
Anything more, we'll turn it over to Mr. Rokas.
Yeah, we can turn it over to Mr. Rokos.
Okay, if you would, tell us what's going on with engineering.
Just to let you know a few projects that are going on. Our I&I project started last week, and we already have about 20 manholes done. There's probably about another 3 or 4 weeks worth of work sealing those up. We had 3 projects that did go to first reading. One was Johnson Drive. The other is the lights around Municipal Circle here. Another one is our storm culvert project that we have going on. So the next council meeting, they'll be at their second reading, and we'll be able to start those projects after that, if they're approved, of course. We do have one project that's out to bid right now. That's our annual curb project. And so we're looking forward to receiving bids on that shortly.
Okay, thank you. We're good. I'll open the floor for public comment, and seeing no one, let's move along to commission member comment. Commissioner Boyd, do you mind if I start with you this evening?
Sure, that's fine. I don't have any comments. Thank you all for a lively discussion. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Good to see you. Commissioner Meiske.
Yes, I do. Thank you for being such a gracious host. And sorry we beat you up. I have a question on the bridge down off of, what is it, I went blank. Yeah, the County Line Bridge. Where's that at in the construction?
We hope to have final plans completed this week and get that out to bid the next week.
Okay, all right, so we're moving. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Good. Commissioner Armstrong.
I'd just like to reiterate the thanks for the patience and the information and y'all have provided tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and throw you into the fire, Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. Just basically looking forward to interacting with the commission, and yeah, just happy to be here. Thank you.
I think I'll go ahead since I'm going in line. I'll still probably get in the last word, but welcome aboard. I will say, based on a few years of experience, that every meeting is different, and I usually try to come in without any predetermined ideas of how it's going to go, because it usually doesn't. It takes on a life of its own. Frankly, I'm very impressed with the discussion we had this evening. You know, at the end of a long day, staff probably would have hoped for less, but I think, you know, considering that one of our roles is to review and recommend to City Council, and I think a discussion like this, which becomes part of the record, certainly accomplishes that goal. And whichever one of you thought of the idea of tabling it, thank you very much. The other observation real quickly is my thanks to the other commissioners. You know, it is not a given that anybody is going to want to go to a place like New Orleans for an annual conference, and so it's nice to have at least 3 volunteers. And I hope nobody feels slighted, but, there's definitely an opportunity for a commissioner to go this year, and keep in mind that there will be another opportunity. Do we know where next year's conference will be?
Yeah, we know the next several years. So next year is San Francisco.
Ah, okay.
I'll wait till, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, man.
We got a few others.
Yeah, nicely done. Nicely done.
Boston comes up.
Yeah.
Houston is after that.
I don't think I'd want to be in Boston this week, would I? Sound like the weather's terrible.
Yeah, maybe that's in May, I don't know. But
Yeah,
Boston's coming
well,
up in a
by
few
then,
years.
sure. Okay, and again, as always, my thanks to city staff. We could not do what we do without your support. Right, Commissioner Zer? Yeah, thank you. Okay, Vice Chair Pfizer.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow that, so I'm going to say no comment.
Commissioner Crane? Secretary Crane?
So much for the comment. This ought to be a quick one.
Oh, who jinxed us?
That would be my fault. No, just kidding.
You're good. Commissioner Urquia.
I would really like to welcome Commissioner Wiggins. I'm now no longer the newest one on the commission, so thank you for that, and welcome aboard. And to just kind of echo everyone's thoughts for, I can only imagine the city council meeting where they wanted to add all this wonderful stuff and then us to come and say, yeah, no. So appreciate your guys' willingness to try to get this sorted out so that we can do our jobs and help the welfare of Raymore move forward. So thank you guys for everything you do. And again, welcome.
Yeah. Unless anybody has anything else to add, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, I heard,
Second, Commissioner Urquia.
well, so I heard Commissioner Maisky, second by Commissioner Urquia to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. And hopefully I count 8. Thank you. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Good night to all.